I'm deeply disappointed in the American public. At the time of the election, I said that this was a character test of the American people, and we failed. And I think it's particularly crucial that 13 million fewer people turned out to vote than 4 years earlier. And with population growth, to have the equivalent turnout, there should have been 17 million more votes. And we won't know for a while why people didn't vote, but the most common reason people don't come out to vote is, gee, things are going well, I'm happy. And so I think a lot of people wrongly thought that it was in the bag or it didn't matter. When Barack Obama ran the second time, he did not do as well with black voters, and there were a number of black Americans who had either never voted or rarely voted, who told political scientists, well, he won, why do I need to vote again?
Right.
Which goes to yet another aspect of the very poor job we're doing of teaching what democracy means in this country. But I tell you what bothered me about Donald's inaugural address, his rally on Sunday, and his rally after the inaugural. It was one well-crafted, but one lie, fabrication, and ridiculous promise that can't be fulfilled after another. And it was so totally outside of the universe of reality that it made me think of this phrase my grandchildren use, all of whom are grown, but they're in their 20s, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I think we now live in the Trump imaginary universe. So Donald imagines that China is in charge of the Panama Canal, therefore it's happened. He imagines that crime is rampant in the country. Of course, crime rose during Donald Trump's administration, and it has fallen sharply during the Biden administration, particularly urban murders. The economy, is a complete disaster in Donald Trump's mind. Everybody who understands economics knows that America has the strongest economy in the world, that we have come out of the pandemic vastly better off than anybody else in the world. And that's largely because of the policies that Joe Biden got put into place. There's no guarantee your economy is going to recover, but he put in the right places. But the Democrats not knowing how to market, not knowing how to explain to what they do, being all the time of either the Jimmy Carter attitude, well, I'm doing good works and everyone should appreciate that, or of the we don't want to do slogans. We'd rather tell you that, if you reach page 47 of my new economic plan, especially footnote 17, well, Donald gets up there and goes, we love the poorly educated, and other slogans. And the Democrats, this is an old song, and I've been singing that song for many years, that the Democrats, they just don't know how to reach people on a visceral level. They know how to reach educated people. There's no problem with that. But that's just a segment of the voting populace. And you're now seeing Donald Trump doing what he has always wanted to do. He wants to make America white again. He's already moved to set up a court case to end birthright citizenship. He issued this executive order, and I've been doing a lot of overseas television the last few days, and every one of these anchors says, well, he's ended birthright citizenship. And I go, no, he hasn't. Executive order of the president does not trump the Constitution. But then what I explained again and again is he's hoping to get a case that will get to the Supreme Court where they will argue that the Constitution in the 14th Amendment, third clause, doesn't mean what it plainly says. Everyone born in the United States is a citizen of the United States. He's going to want the court to say, well, that applied to slaves at the time. It isn't meant to apply to people who come here, who are here illegally, who may even come across the border to have a baby here, the old anchor baby argument, which, by the way, you could apply to Melania Trump, who came here and illegally worked as a model.
Right.
We have the records proving that. There's no dispute about it. But of course, in Donald's world, there's Donald and white people's rules, and then there's for everybody else. But we should be concerned that this Supreme Court majority, who love to talk about originalism and intent and the plain meaning of words are also feckless, and they could well come up with a decision that changes the meaning of the 14th Amendment. A whole host of other actions that all establish how much Donald Trump wants to make sure that if you're not white, if you're not male, you better stay in your place.
Right.
And one of the memes going on around today, by the way, is about the two hand over the heart and then Heil Hitler seeming salutes from Elon Musk. And
yeah, we discussed that. We discussed Musk at length today in the show, so I'm eager to hear what to say.
Well, just briefly, people on the right,
yeah,
people on the right are saying that's just crazy liberal talk. And here's a bunch of pictures. Here's Michelle Obama's hand in that position, and Obama's and other people. And of course, in journalism, context matters. Every one of us has a picture out there somewhere where we have our hand up.
Yeah,
that's not the point. You have to look at this in the context of Elon Musk is a prince of apartheid South Africa. He has made many seriously anti-Semitic comments. I mean, horrendously anti-Semitic comments. And then he'll do something to try and muddy the waters about it. And most significantly, if you go to some of the websites of the neo-Nazi types, the far-right types, the racists, they're all heralding what Musk did. So they plainly took a message from this of aid and comfort for the world they want to live in, which is white Christian nationalism, which has, to be very clear, nothing to do with Christianity. It's totally antithetical to the concepts of Christianity. Love your neighbor, care for the stranger, go and give all that thou hast.
Right. Yeah, I look, we had a debate over it. The ADL, I don't know if you saw, said that it was not a Nazi salute. My argument is I don't think that was his intent yesterday, but mostly that I don't want to, block out what he has, all the things that are bad about Elon Musk and sort of dilute them down into one Nazi salute, because that would be a distraction.
Yeah, I've never liked, Gaff journalism. I think it's a big mistake. I mean, Donald Trump said, if you read his literal words, that Elon Musk rigged the election in Pennsylvania, and some people have written me, and it's like, no, he misspoke. He didn't mean to say that at all. Let's get real. My concern about this thing by Elon Musk, though, is that the people on the far right are interpreting it that way. That's what we should be concerned about.
Exactly.
And then,
people, just to interrupt you, it's not the people that are pissed off about it. It's the people that are enabled by it.
Yes, yes. And we're already seeing, Trump's plans and actions, get rid of all diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, that really means white people have a 100% quota, especially white males. We're going to fire judges who work as administrative law judges in the asylum and entry in the country matters. It's a little unclear, and in India, where I've been doing repeated television, there's a great deal of concern about the language suggesting that if you're here on an H-1B visa, when we do that for technical workers, software coders, geneticists, because we're not producing enough of them, and India is producing really good ones.
Yeah.
That so your spouse comes, you have a child born here. Some people are reading the language of the Trump executive order that that child is not an American citizen, that is subject to deportation, and the spouse is subject to deportation if you don't have a green card. Well, it turns out there are a couple 100,000 East Indians who qualify and have been approved for a green card, but they can't get the system to write the card, to issue it out, because Congress has so stripped the staffing that is required to do this. And so, we should really be watching very, very carefully this effort to go back to pre-civil rights movement, pre-World War II or early 1950s White people are in charge. And now that Donald has released the people who tried to kill his vice president, were screaming to kill Nancy Pelosi, who caused physical harm, including things that forced the retirement of over 140 police officers. What he's got now is a group of thugs who will do his bidding. And anybody who has studied authoritarianism, Timothy Snyder at Yale, Sarah Kendzior, the journalist turned scholar on this subject, and many other people, this is a classic standard thing. You need a group of thugs outside the government to go and attack the people you want. And these folks know that Donald Trump will take care of them. He can't stop a state prosecution. So I think you will see acts of violence done on federal property or in states where they're confident that the district attorney or attorney general will not send people to prison, even if they kill somebody. And I think it could be that bad, even if they kill somebody.
Yeah, I mean, the pardon stuff is so fascinating because there's a lot of this whataboutism. There's a lot of well, he did this. Why is it bad if we do that? I and it's not just because I'm really upset at the J6 pardons. I expect Trump to pardon people. Pardons happen all the time for whatever reason. I mean, I was saying earlier in the show, we fancy ourselves as anti-royal, yet we still keep electing Kennedys and Clintons and Bushes, and we go back to the royal pardons that were given by kings for centuries, and we have them here. It's really our last vestige of dynastic rule. But maybe not the last, maybe that's hyperbole, but it's true that it goes back.
It certainly relates back to that kind of history. And, we saw in Joe Biden that he pardoned all sorts of people who aren't politically connected, people who were given particularly harsh sentences that would not be handed out today for nonviolent crimes.
Right.
And people didn't like that any more than they didn't like it when Jimmy Carter carried his own suit and suit bag over his shoulder when he was president. It's unfortunate, but, Adam Smith, the man who explained first market economics in 1776, in his earlier book, The Theory of Our Moral Sentiments, said that perhaps the biggest problem in human beings is that we tend to admire the wealthy while despising those of what he called mean condition, meaning that they were poor. Right. And I think that's sort of hardwired into human brains, and it's going to be very hard to overcome that. I think we can, but I don't think it'll happen in your lifetime or mine.
No, I agree, and I don't know that there isn't a country in the world that has done that, and we're young and they're older, and it seems to be epidemic. It's what has created, among other things, the sub-Saharan Africa that we know today, with all that poverty and that divide from have and have not. So I mean, it's pretty ingrained in the way we operate. So yeah, I'm not giving it in either lifetimes, to be sure. But what I wanted to ask you about those, and I think you kind of just answered it, David, was that there is a difference. I mean, Biden doing these preemptive pardons, maybe we don't like it. Maybe we wish he hadn't done some of the family stuff. But by the same token, those are not the ones to compare to January 6th. January 6th is a pardon of people who, like you just listed, I don't need to do it again, did those things, which is comparable to Biden commuting the sentences of drug offenders and lesser offenders, right. And unjust. And that goes back to the messaging, right? That goes back to what you were saying earlier. Why can't that be explained? What is it about the way this stuff message?
I've been reading the news accounts in our major newspapers, and I worked at two of them, the LA Times and the New York Times, and I'm just appalled by what I would describe as the namby-pamby descriptions of what's going on here, instead of just straightforwardly, stepping up to the plate and hitting the ball. The overly polite and obscuring language, related to this, Mark Milley, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they've removed his picture at the Pentagon. I mean, this is the kind of petty but rewriting history. When Trump claims, we had the greatest economy in the world under him, which is absolute nonsense, he's rewriting history. And large numbers of people believe whatever Trump tells them is the truth, and whatever you or I or anybody who doesn't agree with them says, well, obviously we're paid liars. We must be on George Soros's payroll. So there's a real fundamental problem. When I went to college in the 60s and the 70s, I went for 8 years, even though I was a full-time reporter at the time. The history of the U.S. Constitution that I learned in the number of classes I took about government, constitution, and history was essentially the idea that the American Revolution worked because it was a revolution of the aristocratic or business owning, in some professors' view, but in all cases, educated class against the king. People who wanted to control their own destiny. They would have preferred to stay part of Britain, but if they couldn't get that, if they couldn't get representation, then they were willing to go on their own. And the Constitution itself has a lot of points in it that make it very hard to change things because there was a lot of concern about the hoi polloi, the rabble. And you're seeing now the reasons that the framers of our Constitution were not the same people as the founders who signed the Declaration of Independence. The framers of our Constitution clearly were very worried about inflamed passions and needing checks and balances in case you had people who were out of control, be it the courts, the Congress, or the president. Donald believes that he has the power to do anything he wants. He really believes he has dictatorial powers. He said during his last administration, I have an Article 2 that says I can do anything I want. Please, if you're watching or listening, when we get off, when the show is over, not my segment, but the show, go to your browser and just type in Constitution, Article 2, transcript, and read it. It's about 700 words. Most of it is about technical matters, frankly. It says, in essence, two things. The president will carry out the orders of Congress. He's their errand boy, and he's the commander-in-chief of the military. Donald sees it that everyone must bow down to him. And on top of this is this belief that he developed, promoted partly by his father, and developed to cope with the monster his father was, that nobody else is his equal. He's special. This is not just being a prince like Elon Musk. This is like really big. And if Donald weren't president, I would tell you he's a megalomaniac. But since he's been now in his second term, it's a little hard to make that argument.
Well, it is hard to that, and that's the thing that silences that criticism and that observation. And look, I mean, there's something of it, like compare him to Jim Jones, right? There's something messianic about the way he's perceived and wants to be perceived. And
yes, and I covered Jim Jones. I was in the LA Times San Francisco bureau back then. I wrote what I think was widely described at the time as the best piece. Charlie Kaiser, who was at the Washington Post at the time, said that about it, explaining who and what he does and how he got people to come under his thumb. And I've written about a number of cults and how this happens. And that's what we're seeing with Donald Trump, is a cult where facts don't matter. And because they don't matter to Donald, it's especially dangerous. You know, China controls the Panama Canal. Absolute nonsense. Right. The suggestion by not saying he would not rule out military force for taking Greenland, which really means attacking a fellow NATO member.
Right.
That's what he would be doing over a complete fiction. All of these things are troublesome, and many people just don't recognize that Donald lives in this fictional world in his head. The phrase I've used for years is he creates his own reality. Yeah. And he can change the script at any moment because he creates his own reality.
And based on one little thing he may have heard that he glommed onto and kept repeating and thinks it's great. So the China-Panama Canal, that William McKinley was a spectacular president. We should rename a mountain for him.
Right.
You know? And this sort of, that's all he needs to hear. Look, I've been to probably I don't know that I could count them. I guess I could count all my credential badges that are upstairs, but I've probably been to 100 Trump rallies, let's just say. And what I see outside is the most fascinating part of it, because these people who have no idea about policy or intent, they hear him say something, they repeat it, and they want it to be true. And I always say that they're there more for the tailgate than for the game. They just want to be with like-minded people, or people who are devotees and to this person for whatever reason. And it's a really curious thing to me. And it goes back to something you said earlier, David, which is that the messaging and the disconnect. There was an interview, and I may have actually said this to you on another time that we've met, but on the show. But there was an interview I saw done. I don't know by whom, but it was a great interview after the election, interviewing people on the street in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's district, asking them if they voted for Trump. And they voted for Trump. Did you vote for Representative Ocasio-Cortez? Yes, I voted for her too. And it's about educating these voters. And you touched on it earlier. So these people who voted for Donald Trump and AOC, and that big drop off in numbers, tells you all you need to know about the messaging of the Democratic Party.
Well, the institutions that did the work on behalf of most people have been more than decimated. That is just 10% gone. There's only 10% left. We need a new word for when it's 9 out of 10 are gone. Lewis Powell, who was this brilliant, absolutely brilliant Virginia lawyer, was hired by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in the mid-1960s to tell them, what do we do? Because Ralph Nader had become the most popular man in America, the most trusted man in America. General Motors had tried to they hired a high-class escort and had tried to lure him into something. It just doesn't work with Ralph. I've never seen Ralph even turn to look at a passing woman, no matter how good looking or how dressed. And
if her emissions were bad, he might have turned. That's
yes, if she was smoking.
Right.
And none of this worked. And Powell wrote this memo. You can just go on the internet and put in the Powell memo.
Yeah.
And in it, he said, well, here's how we bring all the other institutions to heel to business. This was a not white supremacist, but a business supremacist argument. Well, first of all, you got to get rid of the unions. Well, we've gone from 37% of private sector workers in unions down to about 5 or 6%. Secondly, he said, you've got to bring the press to heel. And they've done, in many ways, a very good job of that. And I'm very fearful it's about to be a much more effective job. And then you've got to stop these interdenominational groups. There was, for many years, a multi-story building, 13 stories in my mind, because I went there a couple of times to speak, of interdenominational social justice movements. Catholics, Lutherans, mainstream Protestants, Jewish groups, etc. That whole infrastructure is gone.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the Republicans got through Congress onerous rules on unions. Unions are subject to the most incredibly onerous reporting rules. I mean, if you want to have those rules, fine with me, but they should apply to corporations as well. Unions technically are corporations, but for-profit corporations. And so in some ways, it shouldn't be surprising that a lot of people would vote for AOC and vote for Donald Trump, which is completely contradictory, because no one is presenting a unified notion of democracy and government.
Right.
And we're now seeing very clearly that among the high-tech leaders, well, they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to look out for their welfare. They've gone way beyond this. They are bowing down to Donald, bowing down voluntarily. And you notice that there was only one group of people who Donald Trump expressed sympathy for, except the broad claim that our citizens are being ravaged by criminals. But the only people he broke out and expressed sympathy for were the billionaires sitting there near him in the rotunda who'd lost their homes.
Right.
People who own multiple homes, who have insurance, who rebuilding a house is pocket change to them. Literally, the cost of a mansion to Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos is pocket changed compared to you and me. And yet, I have some of my high school classmates have been posting things. I grew up down in Santa Cruz, which people think of as the most liberal city in America. It was a book, The Leftmost City in America, who are just cheering this on and saying, finally, we have a godlike man, we have a Christian, we have someone who has integrity in the White House. It's like, what planet are you living on?
Yeah, it's mind-boggling, because these are these are people who you hear speak and in other times and think are reasonable or thought of as somewhat reasonable, and then this guy enters the room and everything changes. And he's not someone. I grew up in New York City. I know his act. I've known it my whole life, and that he could fool the entire country is amazing to me. I'm not saying that from some naive place. There are going to be presidents of other parties and presidents of other mindsets that I won't like, but Donald Trump is different than that. He is.
Two things along with that, Michael, to keep in mind. Donald is constantly saying, and every single overseas TV show that I have done, they keep saying, well, he won a huge mandate. No, he didn't. He didn't even get half the vote.
No,
he won by 1.5 percentage points. You want an overwhelming mandate? LBJ in 1964, Richard Nixon in 1972, Ronald Reagan in 1984. Those were mandates. Overwhelming victories. That's not at all the case with Donald, and his margins in the House and Senate are very thin. He'll get what he wants in the Senate, but they won't be able to pass a number of bills Trump wants in the House without the Democrats helping, because there are Republicans who think that the government is a lefty government under Trump. I mean, in essence, from where they're standing. People who, as the saying goes, think Genghis Khan was a liberal. And the Democrats face a big choice. Are they going to say, well, we want to have a functioning government? Or are they going to say, sorry, we're not here to solve your problems. We're here to solve America's problems. And this is going to be a real test of the Democrats. And at the same time, can they position themselves, if things fail, to say they've got the majority and they haven't been able to achieve what they want? It's not us. Or are they going to allow Donald to tag them and say it's their fault, which he will try to do? And if we continue this namby-pamby coverage in the major papers, and it's the Washington Post, the AP, the New York Times, a few other, Wall Street Journal, they set the agenda. What you see on TV, what you read in the provinces is heavily influenced by the news judgment of the editors there, and in turn, the way the reporters at those organizations cover things. It's one of the reasons that I've covered Washington off and on my whole career without ever being there, because I literally think if you're there, you get swept up in this is the way we cover Washington. And there are a lot of people in Washington journalism who just hate me because I embarrass them periodically by digging up a story. I'm not saying you shouldn't have people there. You need to have a lot of them. But I think there's a need for distance, skepticism, and in particular, in Trump's case, connecting the dots. So when the birthright citizenship, instead of saying, well, it doesn't matter, it has no effect. No. Why is he doing this? What's the agenda? And the agenda is get a case before the Supreme Court to get an interpretation that effectively ends birthright citizenship by saying Congress only meant that for slaves from 1865. It didn't mean for people today. The Panama Canal, what's going on there? Well, one thing we know is Vladimir Putin can't ship any cargo through the Panama Canal, and he's not happy about that. These are not, the policies may be crazy, but there's a logic behind them. It's like when someone said to me many times when I was younger and was out covering crime, it's a completely senseless murder. Nobody would, why would anybody do that? There always was a reason. It may not have been obvious. It may not have been one the cops wanted to deal with. There was one of the first times my eyes got open when I was either 19 or 20 at the San Jose Mercury as a staff writer. There was a boy who killed his stepfather. And only after everything was over did I finally find out, and I didn't write about it, that he killed him because he was raping his younger sister. There was a logic to this. It wasn't he's a terrible person, and that's what the cops said to me. There was a reason for it. Well, there's a reason for the things that the people around Trump are doing what they're doing. And just one last thing, Michael, before I go. Every time, folks, you hear Donald Trump tax cut, not true. In 2017, Donald Trump's only significant legislation of his first term was what he called a tax cut. It was a tax increase pushed into the future with interest. We have borrowed $2.5 trillion, or we will have very soon. Right now, we borrowed about $2 trillion to pay for this tax cut. 83% of it went to people in the top 1%, and that's really the top half of 1% and above. The bottom half of the top 1% are mostly two-income professional couples who work, a lawyer married to a doctor.
Right.
And they're not the capitalist class, they're the highly paid professional class. But the top half of 1%, 1 in 200 American families, they got 83% of the tax savings. But there was no tax cut. There was a tax increase that will come due in the future. And now he wants to extend it and increase it, and it's the same thing. And journalists need to start saying, well, what they'll write is, well, if it doesn't, it may not pay for itself. What does that mean to most people? It doesn't pay for itself. The way to say it is, Trump wants to borrow money to allow people to pay who are rich less in taxes today.
Hey, yeah.
But you have to pay interest on this money forever.
Yeah.
And so don't hesitate to write a letter to your local editor, 1 paragraph long, to call up a TV station, to post on Facebook or B-Sky or Twitter or wherever you are. But when this thing comes rolling along, push back. It's not a tax cut. It's a tax increase pushed into the future with interest.
And there's a consistency to what Pamela Horowitz said. She said that Julian, who I'm sure you crossed paths with at some point, David, Julian Bond, that he said,
I met him once. Yes.
Yeah. He used to say, "Don't agonize, organize." And you take your you take your lumps, but then you got to do something about it. And I think that was a great thing to hear today, in light of the fact that there's this great dejection going on among people. You're allowed to have that, but then you've got to turn that into something.
And just complaining to your friends or writing unhappy things on social media, that doesn't do anything.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
It takes action. You got to organize. You got to talk to people. Yeah. You need to point out to people. You don't have to get people ticked off. You certainly don't want them to think you think they're stupid, because they're not. They may be politically uninformed. That doesn't make them stupid.
For sure.
But point out to people, well, Donald calls it a tax cut, but if you're borrowing the money, which is what they're doing, most people can understand that means it's not a tax cut, but you got to put it in those terms. He says he's going to lower food price. He actually made a commitment in the inaugural to lower prices. You don't want lower prices. That implies a deflation, and a deflationary cycle would be a vicious economic circumstance. We've had them in the past, and they're awful, much worse than inflation. But at the same time,
it sure sounds.
At the same time, if you're going to start arresting people who are in the country illegally or partially legally, food prices are going to go up. Crops have to be not only harvested, they have to be planted and tended. Lots of problematic things are going to happen if he pursues his policies. So, my general view is the Democrats need to make a record. They opposed all of this, but LTBT, let Trump be Trump. LTBT, let Trump be Trump. And if his policies turn out to be fantastic and we're all fat, rich, and happy, fine. It's not going to happen, folks. It just can't. The numbers don't work. It's the algebra, which I'm sure Donald never paid attention to. The algebra doesn't work. He wants 1 + 2 to be 7.
Well, you found something that I have in common with Donald Trump. It was hard to do, David, but you found it, and it's algebra. Apparently.
Algebra?
Yeah. That was not my best friend growing up.
But it taught you how to think in a rigorous way.
Well, that's what they told me it would do, and perhaps it did help, and unwittingly, I think, in a rigorous way now because of algebra. Look, it took me this long to find out the reason I took algebra, and you found it, of course. Before I let you go, we had a depressed Canadian is his handle. A viewer of the show had a question for you about the normalization, the inevitable normalization of far-right Republicans. George W. Bush now getting nostalgic attention from yesterday, but he did as much as more damage than Trump has so far. Can you discuss that? I get asked that quite a bit as well.
Yeah. Well, we tend to normalize everything over time because it becomes normal. What in Donald's case we need to recognize is that these things are outside of the whole American tradition. A president is not is an errand boy for Congress. He's not a dictator. He's not all powerful. And the press is going to normalize things. It's just the reality of it. So you need to read with a bit of skepticism everything you read. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Almost everything you'll read in any major publication or here on the air is an accurate recounting of the official version of events, but it may not have any edge to it. And that's where citizens need to push back. They need to don't cancel your subscription to the Washington Post. Complain to the Washington Post about, you had a blunt edge on this story or no edge, or you were just mushy. And I think citizens have a duty here to criticize. Well, we have a duty to criticize the government. We put it in our Constitution. You have a duty to criticize your government. Go read the First Amendment. That's inherent in the First Amendment, including the right of petition and peaceful assembly. But I think we also have a duty here to criticize journalists, not by saying, well, you're obviously corrupt and bad, but why did you write such soft things about something very serious? Why did you write with fudge words or calming language about something that should have your hair on fire? Get tough, get a spine. Don't be a jellyfish. Have a spine of steel.
Yep. Well, important stuff. And I say with George W. Bush, history is what determines how good presidents were. Jimmy Carter, not just because he died recently, people started to be revisiting his actual presidency and seeing that it was a lot better in many places than previously thought as a one-term president. And I think George Bush will probably be judged harshly, but judging him through the perspective of Donald Trump really blurs that, because this is an exceptional type of president.
So Donald, it's important. Donald is not a politician.
Yeah.
Donald is the third generation head of a 4-generation white-collar crime family. They don't break legs. They don't kill people. They steal from you with contracts, with lies, with promises they don't intend to keep. And they believe that everything they do is righteous, that they're entitled to do what they do. And in many ways, they're mercantilists. Before Adam Smith figured out market economics and we got capitalism, although today we mostly have corporate socialism rather than capitalism, the common belief in the world, what you and I would have been taught if we had gone to school in the 1600s, was that every dollar that you have is a dollar I don't have. Every dollar the Spanish have is or a piece of gold we don't have, because there's a fixed amount of wealth in the world. So it's okay to steal from you. It's okay to cheat you. And mercantilism did not recognize what we're very capable of doing. We've been doing it for 200 years, and that's create wealth. But Donald doesn't create wealth. Donald just sucks the wealth out of institutions he gets his hands on. And you should sign up for his emails. I've gotten at least 5 emails in the last 2 days. So while he was president, please send $5 for this. I need your money for that. I mean, he's the beggar in chief as well as the racist in chief.
Buy a mug. I've been getting a lot of buy a mugs.
Yeah.
But yeah, that mugs are a separate issue here at the Howard Thompson Show. David, thank you. When people ask me how to interview people who are young, young people ask me how to interview people, I say, because they get worked up their list of questions, they're looking at it, they become slaves to it. I say, go in with one question. It makes you a better listener, and then you'll just follow up on what your subject is saying. Just try it once. And everybody always says, it's great. Until they meet you. Because there's so much you say that I want to follow up on. I could be here all day. David K. Johnston, thank you so much. Thanks
you.
for helping us along, and I hope they ask me to do this on a Tuesday soon.
All right. Take care, folks. See you in a week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.